Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. Today, our webinar is going to be talking about what to expect when expecting headless. This is actually a part two to a previous webinar where we took things at a much higher level in terms of business context and things like that. But this webinar is kind of focused on some of the technicalities, some of the architectures and things like that all the way through. So before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping, I guess. The first thing is that you notice you're all on mute, but there is a chat. So put your questions in there and we'll try and get to all of them at the end, which will be good. And also, based on this, there is, the normal part about, reminding the customers that you should base your purchasing decisions based on products and services that are currently available. So in today's session, we thought we'd give you an overview of what we are going to discuss first. We're going to talk about the architecture. We're going to talk about performance. We're going to talk about non-functional requirements, preparation, project and budgeting, and Q&A hopefully at the end as well. So lots to get through. So bear with us if we do talk quite quickly. And here are the people on the panel and on the list. But instead of you reading all of this stuff, maybe what we'll do is stop screen sharing and you can see our faces on the screen. So let's do that quickly first. Brilliant. Hi, everyone. So maybe I'll just start and then we'll just go around in a quick circle. So I'm Mistry. I'm the VP of Solutions here at Amplience. Amplience is a content and commerce experience platform. Some of you may already know us. My role today is going to be the moderator. So hopefully bringing 15 plus years of content and commerce experience together with all of these subject matter experts that are here, that are on the call today. So firstly, let's introduce Stas from Astound. How are you?
Hey guys, thanks. I'm really good. My name is Stas. You may read it as Stanislav. Stas is shorter one. I'm a technical director from the Astound Commerce UK. We are dealing with the e-commerce delivery for past 15, maybe 20 years, really. I'm currently leading the headless practice within the Astound Commerce.
Great, thanks, Stas. And let's move on to Ollie.
Yeah, hi Neil. Good to be here. Great topic. So Ollie Wright, I'm a solutions engineer at Salesforce. So been around 4 years. Been in commerce for around 15. Actually spent the last first part of my career client side working with brands and retailers. So lots of good commerce experience. And yeah, mainly focused on B2C commerce solutions at Salesforce.
Fantastic, Ollie. And James.
Hey Neil, good to be here. So James Semple, success architect at Salesforce right now, previously at Mobify. And yeah, I've been working in commerce for the last 10 years or so and in the industry for over 15 years. Basically, any kind of technical client-facing role, that's what I've been doing over the last few years.
Awesome stuff. So now you know us and you know that our faces are real, not just the shots that you saw on the screen before. We might as well get going. So we said we'll start with architecture, and this is kind of a lead on from the last webinar. There will be links at the end that you can go and see. But in the previous webinar, we talked a lot about legacy or like monolith solutions out there and the high cost of change and proprietary skills that are required to put these things together. Now, when we're talking about headless and people that are already saying, I'm going to go headless, how can we ensure that this is not a replication of those same things in a headless world? And maybe in this one, it's best to start with Stats because he's the person that has been implementing this stuff. So
yeah, this is an excellent question. And it's very core question to all of the headless architecture itself. So by definition, the headless architecture is built out of multiple components, which are by design deployed absolutely in isolation. Technically speaking, you've got your headless platforms, you've got some orchestration layers, and you've got your storefront head. And the only place which may remind you a bit of the monolith approach is the storefront head, where all of these components, all of the abilities of these headless platforms will be integrated together. But instead of calling it monolith, that's what we are calling integrated architecture.
Great stuff. And how about a view from your point, Ollie?
Yeah, I mean, on that topic of components, I think a big part of not bringing baggage is assessing what you've got today. So looking at your current landscape, right? Probably even more important than setting what the to be is understanding what you have. I've definitely seen, I'm sure we've all seen occasions where customers, our customers included, are using third-party tools, and they're using probably 10% of the platform that they went live with a number of years ago. And there's just so much more to unlock there. So there's a lot of investments that can actually be maximized as part of a move to headless, because you can start to really make sure that one solution is doing a specific task and really maximize that investment. So I would say do that first of all. And if it supports the approach that you're on, which is, API first, make it cloud native, a SaaS approach, assess it, and then move on to the next. And that will very quickly sort of identify the gaps, right? The gaps in the architecture, and you can start to plug those.
Great stuff. And James, you've been focusing on the front end for ages, but it has all the architectural points. So what's your point of view on this?
Well, I mean, great answers so far. But yeah, I think one of the things that I always try and keep people aware of is diligence. You really need to make sure that those small decisions throughout this build and throughout, going through that, they all add up. So unless everyone's really, really tightly aligned in that sense, from a conceptual point of view, loosely coupled from an architectural point of view, but tightly aligned, then you won't get the kind of performance benefits or any kind of benefits that you're looking for. So everyone has to be really aligned. Also, you could look at tools such as keeping, separate API layers and, maintain those with tools like MuleSoft, for instance, would be an example.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, last time we talked a little bit about this as well, like API mediation, all those kind of things. Like that's an important step, and probably not just for omni-channel customers, right? It could be for anything. So maybe we should dive into this in a bit more detail. Again, it's a bit technical, so we'll start with you, Stas.
All right. Yeah, of course. So omni-channel, multi-channel capabilities are there by design. You've got a number of the platforms which are served to you via APIs. So like anyone can be using it. In this world, we normally would use the two common patterns to orchestrate those APIs. One called API Gateway, probably most of you is familiar here with it. And another one is the backend for frontend. Let's dive a bit deeper for each one and some cons and pros of every single one. So when we are using API Gateway, read it as the separate, probably managed service, which will be serviced by potentially separate team. When I'm saying separate, I mean separate from the team who is actually delivering the storefront head. Typically, those kind of projects may emphasize a little bit of additional complexity when we are talking about the coordination between teams, because right now you've got your headless platform, your storefront head, and your API gateway, and it's potentially 3 separate teams. While when we are talking about the BFF pattern, that's most of the times would be managed by the same team who is working with the storefront head, which provides you more convenience. And you probably heard like one of the most common ways to implement it. It would be the GraphQL Apollo server, which will be serving all of those APIs and providing the results to be rendered by storefront head. From my personal experience, the API mediation is really key here, because when we are talking about headless, we normally would be talking about the agile. Agile means there is a structure to the change, but it can be changed as well at any point of time. And from what I've seen in my few past projects, the client may decide to change things like, "Ooh, I want to change the payment service provider at very last minute," or maybe content management system to Amplience on the very last minute. And that is playing very nicely when this change needs to happen, because team doesn't have to redevelop entire storefront head, because everything is kind of already abstracted from you in that API mediation layer. At the same time, like there is no really like big difference on how you will be managing the API mediation via API gateway. Which can use, for example, MuleSoft or the actual your custom backend for front end. The only thing here is that's the choice between I want to have a very controlled environment for my APIs, and then I'll be using the API gateway, or I want to deliver slightly faster, but losing that bits of control if you're doing with BFF.
Yeah, that's a good summary. Important choice, I guess. And part of it is, making your front end as simple as possible, right? It can be as agile as possible and all those things. But Ollie, what do you see in the field? You're with customers all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I think we hear all of those kind of challenges. I think, and I think we all agree that that mediation between front and back is really crucial for any headless sort of implementation. And a big part of headless is the notion of composable, right? The notion that we can plug in a number of services. But that extends to the front end, right? But I think it's important to say that even if you only have one channel today, what you're doing is setting yourself up so this doesn't happen again, right? That we don't have to build something like this again. So we need to architect in a way that we build a bunch of experience APIs that can serve different experiences as they come to market. We don't know what the next touch point is going to be, right? We have to react to that, both as an industry, as a brand, as a retailer, as a vendor like Salesforce, right? So what we have to ensure is that we stitch the services together in a way that makes them interchangeable, to Stas's point. So whether we're switching out a front end experience or we're switching out back end service, the two have minimal impact on each other. I think the complexity around whether it's a back end front end model or an API gateway mediation, I think that really comes down to requirements, and it's a bit of a cop out answer, but the complexity really does drive which direction we go in, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, James, I think most of it's been covered there, but anything to add?
Yeah, no, it's great answers so far. So I guess I was going to say on that one, I think it's one of the things that often delights people who are trying to look at like how they expand their estate. That, as Ollie was just saying, that basically you gather all of these services into kind of a neck, let's call it, of headless. And that's great because all the functionality, the data is available. And as Ollie was rightly saying, Stan's been saying, you can now pull off these multiple channels. And a great example was given recently by a sports equipment vendor, where they were saying, we can just now add an Apple Watch app on top of that, and we've got all of the same data and we can do it. But it's great for things like clienteling as well and in-store stuff, because you're accessing the same functionality and data. So that's where I think it's a really strong one from the multi-channel aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Sets you up in the right way is pretty much the summary. But you touched on this a little bit. We might as well dive in a bit further. Yeah, so it gives you options for your front ends, which is great, right? That's the agility that people want. But with that, there's considerations. Like, what can we look for here? What advice can we give to people? Seeing we started with Stas a few times before, let's start with Ollie this time.
Yeah, I mean, at Salesforce, we're in a bit of a unique position, is that we quite often walk into existing customers who are looking to move to a headless strategy, and they haven't had to think too much about the storefront. It's been an area that has been largely, they've used a full stack solution. So sometimes it's an area where there's some education to be done, and that's completely fine. We also ask around because we don't know every touch point that might have been developed. And often we find that they've actually gone and done a really cool app project and they built a really great React experience. And they've actually got a bunch of front end devs that could be useful in a headless implementation. So understanding what's been built in-house previously is a really big first point of information. To understand really what front-end dev resources available that can really speed things up. And if you don't have that, I think it's important to say that that's okay. You're not expected to have all the answers in headless, and it's where guys like Stas are crucial, right? To come in and coach and educate and be part of the process early on to make sure that the tech teams are really set up from a front-end perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. We'll come to Stas in a bit, but James, you specialize in front end for a number of years. So yeah, any thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So one thing I tend to see is in a lot of early stage cycles, people are talking about speed to market, rapid builds, and so on like that. But honestly, a lot of the benefits come post build, and I think focusing too much on that can sometimes, force people to cut corners. I'm not saying people are doing that, but you know what I'm saying. If the pressure's on, get it done as quickly as possible. Are you actually going to get the best results? And I think, Ollie was rightly talking about making sure your tech team's lined up. But one of the great benefits, if you're looking for agility, is also, have you serviced your business users as well? It's all very well saying we've gone live and it's amazing, but like, how do we change it now? Is it flexible to be changed without having to call up your tech guys all the time you want to make changes?
Yeah, good point. And Stas, you do this with your teams all the time. So
yeah. Sure. So for us, it's always a weird combination between the business in-house teams and our own teams. Of course, we would like to deliver a full cycle, but headless is not for that reason. Headless enables you to evaluate your internal capabilities, such as DevOps, such as like maybe you have your own React developers, you may have your own technical managers, and you have good product ownership capability inside the business, then it's great. We will be coming there and helping our clients to ensure that business is fulfilled by our additional capabilities, by discoveries, by UX, by experience, and so on. Of course, well, it's not in the real world. You normally, as a business, wouldn't have all of those capabilities. You may have a few because you had some history in other areas previously. And normally those kind of capabilities will feel nicely when the partners team will be wrapped around the business team itself. As for developers in particular, we normally looking, because of course we are known to be a very JavaScript oriented company after Salesforce, after a number of other technologies. So we are looking for most hyped technologies with React and Vue, as this is provides you as a business more security in result, because you potentially can hire React developer or Vue developer elsewhere, and they're quite accessible these days.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people are moving this way because the pool of developers is larger, right? They can take a lot more in-house for the agility on the front and yeah, move things away. But you all mentioned business teams and business architecture in a way. So maybe let's dive into this. You've been doing some workshops and stuff, right, Ollie? Like tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and even more so, I think I know the pain of swivel chair from being a merchandiser for many years, and jumping between lots of different panes of glass, trying to get something done with the pressure on, right, when you've got a new season launch or a new product going live the following day. So I think it's an area that I'm particularly passionate about, both from a solutioning point of view, but as a, you know, some horror stories from my past. But you know, I think we need to align around what is it the job that we need to do? What is it that we need to do? You know, getting product live, launching promotions, start to align around those experiences that you're trying to create, and then align teams around that. So, you know, which parts of the admin do those parts of the team need to access? You know, so we reduce the strain on the admin and the amount of places we need to go to get things done. Amplience are doing great things around this, you know, with injecting third-party UIs into the experience layer so that you're minimizing that swivel chair. And if we can do that, we'll be much more successful. And I think it's one of the biggest risks with a headless or composable sort of implementation is that you end up introducing silos into the business architecture because you've gone down this best of breed route. For sure.
People that are having like 30 different tools to do their day jobs and different screens. Yeah.
Yeah, no one wants that.
Yeah, absolutely. And James, anything to add on this part?
Yeah, just to follow up on really where Ollie was going with that, I would say that one of my biggest recommendations for going headless, absolutely biggest recommendation, is audit your existing system. I can't tell you the number of times. Ideally, it's, you know, best case late in the sales cycle, but sometimes post sales, you'll get somebody turn up at a meeting and everyone's saying like, who's this guy who I've never met before? And he's like, I do this, it's critical to our business. No one's talked to me yet. How are we going to do this when we go headless? And you're like, you know, and that may even be like a whole new product has to get bought because no one's thought of it. So audit your existing system, audit all the technology and processes, make sure you know what you're actually doing right now before you're going to try and create it again. And I do think that going headless is a great opportunity to make process changes as well. But yeah, I think that's really important. I guess maybe one second thing is that there's always been this thing around third-party tags, kind of necessary evil. They can now become full architectural citizens. You can move things like A/B testing, personalization to an API level. And I think that is just better for everyone as well. So yeah.
Much better. It comes with speed as well. We'll get to that topic in a bit. But then I guess from all your experiences, like where do people typically align on their routes to a headless architecture? Stas, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so as it's widely available information for us, right? Like there is a business concept of the composable commerce, and composable commerce represents just the idea where the entire solution needs to consist out of best of breed components. So the headless architecture is actually direct answer to that business idea itself. What that means? That means that now each capability is held somewhere in separate interfaces. Shouldn't be any misunderstanding of what Headless is. Yes, it's actually a big number of UIs. You may have your content manager working in one UI panel, your trading team in another, your merchandisers are in completely separate UI. That may sound like a bit more complicated way to manage your business if you really like very lean team. At the same time, it provides you like cleaner separation of the concerns and who is doing actually what. While in the monolithic platforms, you will be doing all in one. So if it would be me, I can do pretty much everything there without any restrictions. Where the world is moving towards more privileged access to certain areas of the website.
Absolutely, and this is what we talked about before about using tools that can like bring things into one place to make it easier. Yeah, spot on. Completely agree. And Ollie, you've been through this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, just on the back of Stas's comments, really, the architecture seem to align, and it's a trend that I've seen, and I'm interested to see if you've seen this, James, where there is a soft line in the sand appearing around the PDP sometimes. You know, if you think about the classic core commerce journey, right? If we're just talking about web for a second, you know, homepage, search results, PDP, checkout, etc. Everything before the PDP is usually contextual, right? It's content, it's discovery, it's about engaging with the brand. There's search, some merchandising. These are largely areas where you can have an impact, and the risk is minimal in terms of the disruption to the experience. The issue with the beyond the PDP point is you then get into the complexity of commerce, right? The bit that we've been trying to solve for all the time we've been in commerce, right? Is this collision of detailed product information, inventory, payment, shipping, loyalty information, customer details, promotions, triggering, all of this kind of complexity. That webbing gets quite complex, and to decouple that, certainly in a live situation, that becomes pretty complex, and you've really got to plan that out and think it through. So I've definitely seen a lean towards fixing the kind of experiential side of things, and focusing on checkout and cart sort of further down the line. But James, I don't know if you'd say the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has, for me, it's typically been driven by, experiential, people wanting something different out of the website. Just the other day, I had a customer say, you know, we've got a content site and we've got a transactional site. We really want this to now be just one single organic site, which is very natural. I have had a lot of people come in, you know, they're just trying to improve experience, better performance, better mobile. That's often a common one. You know, better just mobile experience, more native, better SEO. I kind of have to say that none of these actually require you to go headless. Just want to mention that point. But yeah, that's what a lot of the drivers are, and that's where they've started exploring. They've started exploring headless from that.
Yeah, I'll just add to that point a little bit. Like, I guess one of the benefits of starting with that experience part is that you've already got a load of components, and then when you do move into this like harder parts, you can reuse those and start to service that information in those places, right? It makes it's kind of a logical step. But you mentioned performance, right? This is the big one, and so many people have assumptions that if you move to headless, you'll automatically get better performance, right? So let's talk about that, because we've all come across this. Let's start with maybe James on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Headless is a complete magic bullet. It aligns the planets, brings peace on earth. No, it isn't. Maybe it's been a bit overhyped. I don't know. Look, you can get fantastic performance. And what I've found is when I've seen a headless site that has got fantastic performance, it's generally because during the build, that separate composable aspect to it has allowed people to go through each layer of it, each aspect of it, kind of with a magnifying glass. And this has allowed them to make sure they can, you know, iron out any bottlenecks or anything like that. And just, again, this is one of those things where, you know, rushing to it isn't necessarily the best approach. I do think that, you know, there's certain things in there about gaming, perhaps gaming Google a little bit with things like server-side rendering as well, because, you know, that's kind of part of the thing. I heard a joke the other day is, where do you hide a dead body? On the second page of Google results, because no one's going to look there. Yeah, but no, really, you know, there's a lot of that about like, how do we get those kind of great big results, right? I think the other thing I would say about performance, again, going back to the tag manager thing, is that previously tags could be quite heavyweight, and you know, you could build a full stack thing where you've kind of built this Lamborghini of a website, and then you bring this tag manager, which is like a caravan, just stuck to the back of it. So the fact that you can now take things like that out, particularly with the impact of Google Core Web Vitals, where they're really going to penalize you for doing things like changing the screen layout after you've loaded. I think that's kind of incentivizing everyone to move things such as I said, A/B testing, personalization to an API layer. And the great thing about that is, again, they can be considered and tested as part of the architecture. So you can do those non-functional tests to ensure that the speed's there.
Makes sense. And Stas, implementing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with James on all the points. Frankly speaking, to me, this is the biggest and most common misconception I'm keep on hearing from the market buzz. Well, like if you go headless, you automatically will be having like a super fast site. All of the web vitals are met. All of the scores are your hundreds. But in reality, what makes sites faster is the developers, is the actual process of the optimization of the website. However, the only thing I think is fair about the performance in headless, because it enables you to use any front-end technologies, any tools, anything really, then you may use better tools to achieve better metrics. But at the same time, nobody can stop Content Manager from loading 10 megabytes GIF on the homepage and screwing up your performance anyway.
But maybe they should get something like Amplience in there. I shouldn't be saying that. Anyway. So what about achieving what you've kind of said above? Like we spoke about the problems. Let's start with James.
So, well, okay, that's a good question. I would say let's start with the physics. I was going to say about the images. I was going to say, because the images thing I was going to say is that I've seen that as well, is that you were talking about this magic bullet thing, and I was going to just say that, yeah, that image thing is something that's like hit me in the past as well, is don't throw away all of your existing previous, things that you knew about making good websites. But just from a performance point of view, physical location, front end and back end, the laws of physics still apply to headless websites. So again, consider that. Consider having multiple setups for that as well, multiple locations around the world, because you're going to have to do things like that. And, you're going to obviously have to be looking at where CDNs are, but typically your head and the back end are going to have the most communication. So putting those close by is going to be important. Obviously, the typical kind of headless thing includes things like user products like Webpack to efficiently slice up what you're actually delivering to your clients, so you're not delivering too much. Really optimize the front end calls. So bring back, things like above the fold. Again, these are kind of just a headless variant on the same tricks we've been using forever, right? But only bring back the content above the fold immediately, and then start bringing back the next stuff. So prioritize different parts of the content. And then, make sure that you're measuring actual real performance, and then focus on, perceived performance. So one aspect of, headless is to maybe use a progressive web app, and you can have things like the placeholders in place straight away. So as you click on a link, the page immediately rebuilds because it's using local content, and then you can start pulling in the stuff. So the perceived thing is really definitely hugely important. It's not just actual raw speed. That perception is important too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stas?
Yeah, so frankly speaking, I'll be separating the performance in two categories. One is the client-side performance, and we are talking about the web vitals, and another one is the actual backend side performance of your backend for front-end and your headless platforms, basically, in this case. So the only common ground between those two, you always need to set your KPIs. You need to ensure that you are working against realistic targets, considering your site design, your site experience, and amount of functionality on your website. Really, all of those new fancy frameworks, they coming with a lot of tools, as James mentioned, Webpack. There is also roll-ups. There is a number of the concepts that you can use for optimization and post-launch optimization. However, to me, and what we experienced in the past, is that without proper automation of these KPIs controls, you may fix your performance once, but then after a few deployments, you still have to fix it. So one of the things that we are currently using is the lighthouse testing as part of your CI pipeline. So basically, as long as developer creates his pull request without deployments to any environment, you can't merge the pull request until your lighthouse page speed scores has been fixed, which creates this great control and the cultural attitude of the developer to mind the performance. As for the backend side thing, there is nothing much has been changed. We're always talking about the caching. We're always talking about minimization of number of the live calls to different systems, specifically to different headless platforms. The few things I want to share with you, of course, you've got two sides of things. Normally, when we are talking about the storefront head, we are talking about the universal applications, which will support both the server-side rendering and your single page application at the same time. Your server-side rendering will benefit from one of the common reverse proxy solutions, such as Nginx Fast CGI, for example, or more advanced and probably more common in the Magento world is the Varnish. As for the in-memory caches, of course, like what we are personally using is the Redis. Of course, you may use the memcache. It all depends on your specific case. BFF also Redis cache. So just to summarize all of this, headless architecture gives us way more control than more packaged monolithic solutions that we have used in the past. But with all of that, like what comes to us is the greater responsibility for what we're doing and how do we configure all of that.
That's all. I was going to go to Ollie, but I just got a phone call. But Ollie, we'll keep it super. We'll keep it super quick. But like anything to add on the performance? Yeah.
No, I would just agree with the two guys' comments. I think the only thing to add is I definitely see a trend around things like script tags and lots of unused third parties sort of lying dormant. That's something that affects, full stack sites, headless sites all around. Caching strategy is another big area where, again, there's a bunch of optimization that needs to happen there. CDN as well. CDN configuration is an area that we've, again, this is a unique thing we've seen in that we've always bundled in a CDN capability into our native storefront. And a lot of our customers migrate to headless. Don't necessarily have the expertise on the CDN side. So if they go out and look at a CDN solution on top of their custom storefront, there's some education there that we can help them with. I would say largely you're just trying to reduce the amount of chatter that's happening between front and back, right? So that the performance impact is just minimal.
Yeah, perfect. Right, we're going to run out of time, so let's go really quick through this one. What do people often overlook that's super simple? Stas, if you can do it quickly.
So I'll just add up to Ollie's comment around the CDN. You may have the best CDN ever, but you may forgot to configure it, and then it's becoming very weird there. That I have some very expensive CDN solution here. Why doesn't it work, right? But it's more about this preparation to the go live. Image optimization is one of the key factors that always been missed. Even if you have Amplience, as you mentioned previously, 10 max GIF will be there still if content manager forgot to add the transformation parameters. And number of the JavaScript tags added to the page, they're significantly impacting all of those. You need to think on how to asynchronously load them as much as possible.
Well, James?
Yeah, I think as well, when you're looking at performance, don't forget that Google has its kind of preferences and they're going to very heavily punish you. So yeah, wrong type of image, they'll punish you very heavily for that. Yeah, blocking JavaScript, definitely. Look out for things like web fonts. Again, just make sure that you're paying attention to all of these things and don't just add them as a matter of course. And again, sort of as you're building the pages, just try things with and without. We added a tag manager once, and it was just like the empty tag manager just affected the page performance so badly. So just always check that as you're going through it. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's move on to one of the big topics actually about non-functional requirements. So like projects need to be successful, but you also need to outline these like upfront between the applications and how they kind of work. So Stas, this is going to be mainly for you. So yeah, give us your thoughts on this one.
I'm going to talk a lot about this, well, but let me try to make it as short as possible. Okay, so let's divide it like in few pillars. You've got the security, you've got your deployment, you've got your support and maintenance. So security-wise, this is one of the most black boxed components of the headless architecture on one hand, because technically speaking, most of your customer data would be managed on different headless platforms. At the same time, you are becoming the processor of that data all the time. So that's where like liability for some of the security considerations is landing on your side, even though you may have worked in the managed environment. So one of the things that I'd like to manage here is the fact that normally you would have just a number of the UIs, number of the admin panels and so on. It's like real zoo of the systems which may work in different way. The only common ground that I see so far, which may make this work simpler, is having the SSO solution somewhere to aggregate the management of the administrative users for all of those UIs. So as for deployment, it may be very easy, it may be very complex. It all depends on number of the applications and systems and the requirements of the business on how often they want to deploy and so on. Sometimes for example, you've got your storefront hat and your backend for front-end application represented as two separate containers, two separate applications. What that means that you actually have flexibility to deploy them separately. While it sounds great, that's not what's happening in real world. In real world, that means that you've got basically two applications, and they has to be deployed at the same time. There's very, very few changes that you will be introducing only to storefront or only to your backend for frontend. And sometimes, even though you are introducing your change only for storefront, it's quite inconvenient to deploy the backend for frontend separately. With all of that, there is a role of the site reliability engineer, which may help you. This is Google concept, the extension of the DevOps and more defined version of the DevOps, of course. But those kind of people will help you understand on how to achieve the best results with your deployment environment. They will be introducing for you like blue-green deployment, canary, rolling deployments, and so on, depending on the overall complexity of the system. As part of the maintenance and support, that's where the number of options on how is quite huge. Just for a reference, but the opinion here really is you should be using something that everyone else does, because that's what most likely will be supported by someone who see the demand for their products. So this way, for the logging, we would be using the what's it called, the YLK stack. We would be using the Prometheus and Grafana for the ongoing monitoring and alerting, and sometimes we may use Zabbix for aggregating all of that. For the storefront hat, really there is the only thing you'll be monitoring is the logs. As for the backups and disaster recovery, luckily, because your storefront hat is bodiless, so there is nothing to store and nothing to really play around with. You only need to take care of disaster recover your credentials if you're storing them in some database storage. Other than that, there is nothing really that you need to take care of for the storefront application itself that needs additional backup setup.
Got it. Cool. And Ollie, super quickly, is there anything to add in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you a real anecdote just around resilience. It's one area that's come up before. Things like my account. So where you've got a real consumer-led action that they want to access their account to track their order or process a refund. You've got a number of third parties that are being pulled from in that instance. So, you know, a loyalty platform could be one of them. Things like circuit breakers become quite crucial in terms of trying to minimize the impact on customer experience. I think the worst situation to be in is when your consumers are seeing the lines that you've drawn internally. And that can happen sometimes if you don't have that resilience in the storefront and in the front end. So it's an area where anywhere where speed's critical, things like checkout, where there are a number of third parties being called, I think throttling those third parties is a real crucial part of the resilience step in the NFRs.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And James, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I just think everyone's obviously right on target with these, but I guess one thing is, you know, everyone's so excited when they're going headless about all the new things you can do. Are you checking out the stuff you've taken for granted so far? So what is the cost to your system if you do go, you know, like all of the things that Stad's been outlining, what happens if you go down on Black Friday? You know, all of these things like that, what happens, what is the cost to that? What is the cost if there's a data breach? What is the cost if you don't hit security compliance? All of these things like that. Who's in charge of that? Who's looking after it? If the site goes down 5:30 on a Friday, who are you calling? Who's doing that? So it's not the kind of sexy thing that sells headless, but it is important to have this, you know, how have you got 99% uptime and so on like that, and scalability and performance. And particularly scalability because, you know, with retail, you do have this crazy time of massive requirements to scale through, you know, Cyber Week, Black Friday, and other sales, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, let's move on to preparation. Hopefully, we started 10 minutes late, so hopefully we'll have 10 minutes more at the end here. But in terms of preparation, from a technical point of view, what preparation steps should people actually take? Stas, we'll start with you again on this one.
Sure. I mean, the key step here is the discovery. Discover what you're going to do. The only part of the headless discovery, it's normally experience driven. It's less of the architecture driven, it's more of the experience driven, which then it will impact the architecture then. So of course, like normally we would start from the listing out all the abilities that we must present to the end user and identify all of the required systems that we need to implement that abilities. That's not really so different from the regular discovery. You still will have your classic gap analysis. You still will have your requirements gathering sessions and so on. But really, the difference between the monolithic discovery and the headless discovery, if you're going into more fixed models, there's way more things to discover. Because normally monolithic platforms, they are limited for a reason. They solved some of their tasks already there. But in headless, you may need to create those abilities from scratch.
Yeah, good point. And James, in terms of anything else?
Yeah, I would. Well, one thing I would say is that when you're looking at, you know, often very few people going in greenfield, right? So when you're looking at your existing site, be very careful when you're moving across. What was an actual workaround that was built into existing architecture? Because let's face it, there are very few architectures don't have workarounds built in. And I do see people sort of, you know, kind of very sort of diligently just transferring it across to the headless architecture. Like, maybe we should take a step back and have a look at that. Do we still need to do it? And of course, the same thing is also one of the big benefits, potentially this agility that comes with it, is review your internal processes. You know, for instance, if you always just deploy like every last Thursday of the month or something like that, could you do it so you didn't have to fix it to a date? Could those other processes be changed if your deployment is incredibly fast now? So just a whole bunch of things like that, because if you're going to stick to those old processes, you might not get some of the benefits of going headless.
Yeah. Ollie, processes, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the SE on the call, I'm going to sing the praises of good discovery. I think it's my favorite part of this job, and it's so crucial. And one of the things we've developed actually in the SE team here in the UK is a readiness assessment, a maturity assessment around commerce for any approach, whether it's commerce-led, hybrid, or a custom headless implementation. And it looks at people, it looks at ecosystem, and it looks at the customer experience around. We go through all of those in detail to work out what does good look like for us as a brand. And how do we get to that point? And we do these kind of process mapping exercises where we'll take an example like, you know, launching a new product or getting a promotion live, and we list out the steps on what it takes to get that done today. And exactly to James's point, you hear some wonderful stories about, you know, someone runs downstairs and they push a button and they run back up and they grab the file from the Google Drive and then it appears and then they drop it in the FTP server, and you know, and those things are not unnormal. They're so common. We've all seen them. We all might have been in brands that have had to do that process. So we just don't want to migrate that process, but we do need to understand why that happened and why those silos appeared and get rid of those as part of the implementation. It's as much about people as it is about tech for me.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah. So with those processes, and you've done your discovery and your stuff is outlined, like surely one of the advantages of Headless is it lets you prioritize like which bits you're going to do first, right? Solve the bits that are the most important. Like James, do you have any views on it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you go back to, you know, what are the burning issues you're trying to solve? Let's not go headless for the sake of it. You know, let's not go headless because the CEO's golfing partner wants his site to go headless. You know, let's come back to the real world business drivers. And so, yeah, you know, for instance, SEO performance, then maybe top of funnel might be a good starting point, because we all know that performance through top of funnel is likely to, you know, basically increase revenue, right? So that could be a good low hanging fruit. And some companies I've worked with have gone big bang, the entire site in one go. Some of them do start with this kind of smaller, you know, dip the toes in the water and do that. And I guess the other aspect from that is from a transformational project, if you do start going across gradually, you may be able to pull the ROI earlier in your transformational project. You know, you might get those low hanging fruit that help sort of self-fund the project. So that can be good.
That's it. Less risk, more value. There we go. Ollie, anything to add?
Yeah, I absolutely echo that. I think there's two trains of thought we definitely see. If you're thinking from a purely technical perspective, we want to choose the least risky area, right? The area that we can have minimal risk of the existing solution. So that could be doing a full headless build in a small international market, as James said, or picking a really minor functional area in the site, something that's maybe clunky today that we can fix, or just getting our product feeds exposed through APIs or inventory through APIs, you know, getting that into your middleware and your API layer. The other option, of course, though, is if you actually want to get buy-in for this from the business and get it signed off, get resources, get some business value behind it, you might find yourself attacking an area of the site that's particularly poor, something that actually affects conversion, affects performance, affects AOV, affects the way the traffic is being routed into the site, because that's an area where you can say, well, hey, we're going to increase by X amount if we do this, and then you're going to have a much easier time, right, getting this signed off up the chain. So it depends on where your brand is and organization is at. In both approaches, though, we tend to see some sort of parallel running where the old stack and the new stack are sort of running in parallel, which has its advantages and challenges, but ultimately it's probably the safest route to go to move to this over time, I think.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you have a cut-off time, so you don't have to keep both forever and ever. Yeah. So yeah, we talked about multiple channels before, and Headless obviously gives you options there. So maybe Stas, you can talk a little bit about like that, just high level again.
Yeah, so whenever we are discussing the omni-channel, multi-channel applications and everything, that's what Headless was essentially built for, to remove some of the integration concerns. So everything in your headless architecture will be API driven. And whenever we are hearing that, oh, here is an API available, then that means that we automatically can integrate. So for example, you may want to integrate your POS terminal directly to your e-commerce store for whatever reason. Maybe you are building some kiosk application there. And it's possible. It's possible as long as there is APIs. But in the right headless architecture, there will be this API mediation layer, which will also abstract those integrations, probably even from the e-com platform, and encapsulate some of the logic, some of the integration logic there. And regardless of all of your headless platforms, you would have this ability to introduce and implement as many front ends, as many channels as you wish, really. Because the storefront head is just one of the heads that can be there. It can be like one body, and we just cover it with your API mediation, and multiple heads, like we are talking about, like we're multi-head dragon.
I'd love to see a multi-head dragon. Our CTO calls it like the Cyclops and Medusa and stuff like that. So James, on that front, like difference between full stack and that for omni-channel?
I haven't got any mythical creatures to add, but yeah, no, this is one of the areas where I think BFF is really, really great, because it's not just the fact that you can expose the right data and functionality. Let's just take mobile apps. They're typically kind of chatty. There are lots and lots of requests, but small requests, slightly different to the way that, say, traditional websites have worked. So I do like the fact you can consume the information the way you want. And that really does give you the huge flexibility in that sense, and all that functionality is all wrapped up effectively in some form of middle tier and exposed.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. Right. The last topic around here is around project budgeting. We're going to have to be super, super fast on this one. But I guess we'll pick the two main bits. So for a successful headless implementation, like everyone thinks about IT being there to deliver everything. But what can you pass on to the audience today that's kind of different from that? So we're going to start with James.
Well, just don't underscope, I guess. It's really, really easy to get caught up in this. Just make sure you are scoping the full project. Again, to kind of go back to my earlier point about people discovering it, when you look at it from this point of view, what does that mean? It means deadlines get pushed back. It means costs go up. So to try as hard as possible early on to get a full idea of exactly what you're replacing, so you've got a full scope of your budget.
Perfect. Yeah. And Ollie?
I think really simple from me. I think just organize for success. We talk about it a lot at Salesforce, right? So yes, it's a tech-led initiative. The benefits are largely architectural. Let's be clear. Long term, there's benefits on the experience side, but bring the business in early. Make sure they're involved in the conversation. Make sure that their pains and challenges are transmitted in the new architecture, and that they're fully involved and sign off on it.
Makes sense. Awesome. And Stas, 2 second one from you.
Yeah, one of the biggest benefits of the headless architecture, it's componentized nature. Basically, you're paying for each separate component individually. So for CFOs, for the account managers, it will be easier to see and generate the return on investment stats for all of that. And you will work in more controllable environment anyway. However, with that, it comes that you may have also to work in more agile way. If you don't like one system, you can replace it with another one.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of maps into what we said earlier about business and everything else. So when things are kind of like putting together from a business point of view, like what considerations are there on top of that, right? So Stas, seeing as you were already talking about this.
Yeah, sure. So the key to successful project here is not to try and build everything from the very beginning, because there's quite a lot of the stones underwater which you may have never seen. Even though you may be like the most expert, the biggest expert in the headless architecture or in your storefront, there will be one system you will be unfamiliar with, and that will go down. Instead, the recommendation here is to always focus to release the first version of your storefront product as your minimum viable product. You need to introduce absolute minimal scope to your end users. And then, of course, like when it comes to the agile, you just start and iterate over and increasing the business value of your solution by introducing new functionality.
Yeah, sometimes you get there and your requirements have already changed if it's too big. Yeah, I completely with it. James? He's on mute.
I really want to echo, I really want to echo exactly what Stas just said there, which is, yeah, I actually had a customer that did exactly that. It's, when the site went live, they're like, this is great. 12 months later, like, this is absolutely perfect. And it's exactly what Stas rightly said, which is, what they don't realize is that now they're agile, they can make all those extra changes and get to perfection. And this is one of the big things that agile is such a complex word to really unpack. But yeah, I think Stas, yeah, absolutely 100%. And again, this is an opportunity to change your business. I sometimes say if people want something minor and they think headless is a solution, it's like moving house because you don't like the color of a wall. It's a big thing, right? And it should be treated as such. Processes, team structures, skills, release cycles, everything's up for grabs at this point.
Absolutely. So last point on this stuff, I guess we talked about many things. Like, do you need to hire around a headless implementation? Because we spoke about this in all of the topics, right? Maybe we'll start with Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the maturity of the what talent's in the business in terms of around headless and front end implementation. But what I do tend to see is you can become more attractive to front-end devs that want to work in React or have a particular specialty, and it allows you to hire real specialized, focused individuals that excel in that field. Where they don't want to work on a full stack solution or don't want to, know everything from front to back. And the same goes for back-end devs and API specific development, middleware, etc. So you can certainly be more specific. And I also think it unlocks more agility with how you work with your SI as well. Ongoing is there's options around who owns which part of the solution, which bits do you need support on when new projects go live, what involvement do they have? It gives you a lot more flexibility on that side of things for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. And James, what about people that are already in there, right? Like, can you use them better?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. So retraining is a great option, and as Ollie said, a lot of the times they'll be chomping at the bit to get those new skills. So it can be a really great opportunity and sort of reinvigorate in that point of view.
Super stuff. Right, we went a little bit over, but I'm just going to wrap up super quickly. I think there's some points that we heard again and again and again. One, importance of planning through this stuff, discovery and everything else. And then also getting the business buy-in throughout. So if everyone understands what they're doing and why and bringing it together, everyone's involved, you don't miss anything, it kind of goes hand in hand. Also, nothing magically happens. There are frameworks, there are things out there, right? But at the same time, it's still something that you control, right? But the benefits as well, on top of all those kind of parts of considerations, are you can focus on the areas that are most important to you. We could also talk about the importance of the API layers. That was a whole section for like 20 minutes at the beginning, which was great. But I think the summary of it, if you get that right, your front end is so much more agile and these into be so much more performant, right? And lastly, you can have in-house exports, there's exports experts, and lots of like agencies and SIs that can help you through this. One of the advantages is they've done this a lot before, or will know people that do, right? And so you don't have to have any of the risk and all that kind of stuff all the way through. So what I'll do very quickly, because we don't have too much time, is I'll just share a quick screen with some of the links. And while that's going on, if you guys can have a look at the chat, there is literally hundreds of questions. So we'll probably just have to pick a couple to go through. So let me just go through this first. Firstly, on the screen, you'll see some links. These will all be sent to you via email and everything else. So these are white papers, stuff that is all relevant here, and contact details for everyone on here if you need to. And lastly, then, let's have a look at the chat and see if we can get to some of the kind of Q&A stuff that's in here. All right. If we pick two, maybe, of things that you guys want to answer, that might be useful.
Yeah, there's one here, Neil, around additional heads versus like a managed environment. So if you think of the total cost of ownership and what that works out to, if you think about, we've got lots of customers actually, pretty much some of our first headless use cases actually were everything away from the storefront. So, they were building a mobile app or an in-store experience or a pop-up or a kiosk. There were lots of headless type experiences like that where the APIs were leveraged. And that's still a really valid approach. There are lots of our customers who fall back on that native managed environment storefront for everything where it's the digital flagship, right? The core web business, they fall back on the best practice storefront that we provide, and then they extend that with headless experiences and map around it. In terms of the TCO, I think it hate to say it, but it largely depends. But I think both approaches are really valid. There's no real right answer here. And I think that's a theme of Headless, is that there is not a single answer. It really does depend.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. There were a lot of questions talking about like the capabilities and APIs inside of Salesforce and things, which are all grouped, right? Like you have your open commerce API, you have your storefront API, you have the different APIs and new ones that are coming as well. And plus, like Stav's mentioned all the way through about this integration layer or API mediation layer. So all of the stuff that you're trying to think of doing is possible in this way in Salesforce too, right? So you just have to kind of get some more information and some follow-ups and things, but building it into the way that suits you. And like you say, you might be using different parts throughout, but they are there. We've had customers that have gone through together that have gone completely headless with Salesforce and Amplience, right? And looking after experience and making sure all their transactional and all those kind of things, all the complex screens and payment, checkout and all that kind of stuff, they're all maintained because they focus on the bits they want first. So it's not specifically answering all the questions, but I think when I'm looking at the chat, there's about 10 that are grouped into that one thing. But I'll probably leave it, unless there's any super urgent ones in the chat. We'll leave it there and we will follow up. I think we'll have a record of all these questions and we know who has asked them to. So we'll try and follow up with everyone there. But anyway, thanks for your time. Sorry for overrunning by a bit, but hopefully you got lots of useful information. And I'm jealous of all of these speakers with their lovely backgrounds and houses. It'll be awesome. And we can maybe get some sunshine. Great. Thank you very much and have a good day. See ya.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.